My candles, they turned out so pretty and they smell so good. I am ready to start selling them. I test burned my candles twice, so I should be good to go, right? I used the wick guide on the manufacturer's website and picked the one that was right for the diameter of my jar, so I'm good to go. I don't need a test. The new jar is the same size or almost the same size, well, close to the same size of the one I already tested. And this one works well, so I don't need to test the new one. The CT on this is amazing. I absolutely love how it smells. So I know the hot throw is going to be just as wonderful. I don't need to test this. Notes? I don't need to take notes. I'll remember everything. I know I'll remember everything. I don't need to write it down. Hi, welcome back. I'm Lisa with Candles by Sincerely Ice Blue. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to click on the subscribe button. If you've come back and seen me a few times, click on the bell so you're notified as I put out new videos. On this channel, we talk about making candles, selling candles, and the everything. And yes, I know I always say it, but there is so much everything in between making them and actually selling them and having a successful business. So I know I've been gone for about a month or so, but life has just gotten so crazy. And trust me, that happens, especially when you're trying to run a business. And a lot of what I've been doing for the last month is what we're going to talk about today. So let's take a look and get started, shall we? Okay, it is a new year. It is a time for new beginnings. And I know everybody is so excited to see what their business does for them this year and all the fun things you can get involved in. And one of the things I've been paying attention to over the last month is the forums and a lot of the emails and questions that I've received from all of you. And most of it is about my arch nemesis, wicks. Wicks are not easy to figure out. And if you're lucky enough to make a candle and it burns beautifully the very first or second time that you make a candle, you are extremely lucky, and I'm extremely jealous of you. So what I want to talk about today are the 6 things that you already heard me say in my opening. So the first one, just because your candle turned out beautiful and it smells delightful and you're really pleased with how it turned out and looks and you created a beautiful label, don't assume that just because it looks wonderful that it's going to be wonderful and that you're ready to sell it without testing it, because there are a lot of things that can go wrong with this candle that you don't know about if you don't test them. And if you're on a lot of the forums on Facebook, you're going to see what some of those problems are. I have seen people whose candles have exploded, people whose candles tunneled straight down the center. There is just a ton of different problems that you're not going to be aware about if you don't test. You have to test. Don't assume that just because your candle is gorgeous that it's going to burn just as beautifully. It might not. So that being said, you actually have to burn your candle all the way down. You can't just burn this candle once or twice and think that it's going to be wonderful, because your candle is going to burn hotter as it gets lower in the jar. And I know it's weird to think that. Just because this jar is the same size all the way down, it's not wider or thinner at the top, it's a straight line jar, I can't assume that it's going to burn the same all the way down. And I can tell you from some of my candle testing that that is very true. Candles burn hotter as they burn down. So when I start out, this candle might have a beautiful flame. And then it gets to the midway point and all of a sudden it's burning hot. And as it gets lower, it's burning so hot that when you go to touch the jar, you actually burn yourself. That's a hazard. You don't want that. Another thing you can find is that it's burning beautifully from the get-go, and as it gets lower and there's more and more wax around it, your wick drowns. Well, now half your candle is going to be wasted. So burn your candle all the way through. One, you've got to test that wick, but more importantly, you've got to test the safety of that candle. Another thing that you're going to be looking for is burn time. How many hours did you burn this candle? Because when I sell it, I want to be able to say, I got 32 hours burn time with this candle. I want to know. I want to know how many hours I get. What happens when you're at a show and somebody comes up to you and says, oh, this candle, it just looks kind of small. I want to be able to respond and say, it might look small, but I actually get 32 to 35 hours of burn time out of that little candle. You see what I did there? I just took you as a customer from, oh, this candle's small, and totally changed your perception. Burn your candles all the way through. Don't just do 1 or 2 burns and think that this guy is good and ready to go and ready for sale. It might not be. Okay, another misconception is the wick guides. The wick guides are just that. It's a guide. And I know it's frustrating because I gotta tell you, I have all the wick guides printed out, and whenever I buy wicks, I actually write on my wicks the size that the wick is supposed to fit into diameter-wise. So for instance, this is a CD12, and according to the website, a CD12 should be a 2-inch to a 3-inch diameter candle. Great. I can tell you that it is literally just a guide because there are so many other things that come into play. And if you've been watching videos and doing your homework and studying candle making, you've come to realize by now there are a lot of variables that go into making your candle. It's not as simple as pick out a jar, pick a wick, pick a wax, find a fragrance that you love, mix it all together, pour it, and poof, you have a magic candle, and it's wonderful, and it's going to burn great, and it's going to be wonderful. It doesn't work that way. You have to take so many different things into consideration. And I live in Texas. It gets really humid here in the summer. I even have to take that into consideration when I'm making my candles. There's an awful lot of variables, from the type of wax, the temperature of your home, where you're storing it, the temperature when you pour it, when you add your wax. What else are you putting in there? Dyes, what fragrances, what are the different flash points and such for your fragrances? Are you adding anything like adornments to the top? So maybe I'm adding a little bit of glitter. Make sure you're using the right glitters. We'll talk about that another time. Little stones, dried flowers, just whatever you're putting in there. All of that comes into play because if you're using the wrong adornments, you could smother your wick or clog your wick, as they call it. You could cause a candle to burn too hot. So for instance, dried flowers are not usually recommended because they're dried flowers. They're going to catch fire. So if I put them in my candle, they're going to catch fire, which makes the candle burn hotter, which makes it a fire hazard. So lots of things to keep in mind. Don't get frustrated. Just remember that guide is literally a guide. Another thing to keep in mind is that you could be changing the way you make your candles. So for instance, I use the American Freedom Wax from Soy Organics, but I now have started adding a little bit of beeswax to my soy. And what that's done for me is make it a little bit of a harder candle. I've gotten a little bit better of a hot throw from them, and I'm really happy with that. But that changes when I now look at that wick guide and it says that this wick is for use in soy. I have to make sure, is it also good for beeswax? I'm changing the dynamics of the product. You can't always just assume that because the wick guide says it's going to work, it's going to work. It's not always the case. Okay, another misconception is, by now you probably know that you're going to measure the inside diameter of your candle. So that's from the wall to the wall, not to the outer edge to the outer edge. If you have a thicker candle, that's going to change the diameter, and it could change it by a lot. It could change it from 2 3/4 to 3 1/8. So make sure you're measuring properly. But more importantly, don't assume I could take these candles and put them together and say, oh yeah, you know what, they're the same size. They actually are not the same size, even though they appear to be. And because of that, I can't assume that the wick is going to work the same. I have to test. I can't just say, they're pretty much the same jar. They're going to work the same. They're not. They're two different containers. The glass and the makeup of the vessel is different. I could be doing something different with making them. So don't assume that because your candle vessels are the same or appear to be the same, that they are. You still need to test. You still need to burn that candle completely. All right, next misconception. And this is something I have even noticed of buying candles at big box stores. I won't mention any names, but I'm sure you know a couple that I'm talking about. You pick up your candles, what's the first thing you do? You smell them. After you pick them up, you smell them. You hold them. You see if you like them, because now you make candles. So I know you're looking for some imperfections, but the average person picks up that candle and they smell it. Don't assume that because you are getting an amazing cold throw that you're going to get a hot throw. Don't assume that because this candle is beautiful and looks wonderful that that cold throw means that it's going to have the same kind of smell when it burns. Sometimes these candles burn at a different smell than what you're smelling from the cold throw. And as you start studying and learning about fragrances and learning about the top, middle, and bottom notes, you'll get a better understanding of why that is. But another thing that you have found if you've been testing is that this candle could even burn pretty and there's absolutely zero hot throw. Zero hot throw. A lot of the times the way we want to adjust, the first thing we want to do is add more fragrance. If I'm already at a 10% or maybe a 12, depending on the fragrance and what I'm allowed to fragrance load your wax at, don't do that. Don't assume that just because you don't get a hot throw that there's not enough fragrance in there, because that's usually not the case. It usually has to do with all those other variables we talked about and mentioned, but it's probably the wick. I have found a lot of times that either that wick needed to go up one or down one. What do I mean by that? So if I'm talking about, let's say, the CD series, and I'm burning a CD12 and I have zero hot throw, I'm probably going to rewick that candle and I'm going to change it to a CD10 or a CD14. I'm going to go up one or down one. And I have found a lot of times when I do that, not only is the burn better than what I thought it was, you're going to get a hot throw. So what if I put it to a 10 and I still don't get a hot throw? I started at 12, went to a 10. Now I'm going to go up. I'm going to go to a 14. Why would I not go to a 14? Because I burned it at a 12 and it was too hot. I burned it at a 10, still no hot throw. So for me, I'm going to change the style wick. So maybe instead of a CD series, I go to a CDN or a Premier or an Eco. Sometimes the wick you have picked, even though I talked about that guide, told you that that wick would work or that wick should in theory work, doesn't mean it will. You have to burn your candles to find out. Also, sometimes you'll start burning your candles and get a scent at the beginning, and as you go down, you won't get one. Sometimes that means you might have to adjust your fragrance. Sometimes it might mean you have to adjust your wick. I know, it's frustrating. It is so much more than you thought when you got into this, isn't it? I know, I'm there with you. All right, so the last one that I mentioned, number 6. Number 6 is a big one, and I did this when I started making candles. Everybody's talking about you have to have test sheets and you got to take notes. And I thought I was taking good enough notes. And looking back at those notes, I was not taking good notes. And in my brain, I thought I was going to remember it. I figured I'm only making 2 candles. I'm not going to forget this. I'm going to tell you something. You're going to make those candles. You're going to set them on your shelf to cure them for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And you're going to be busy with the rest of your life. Your children, your job, paying bills, working out, going out with friends, and all of the everything that we all deal with every day. And then you're going to come back to it and you're going to look at that candle and you're going to go, what did I do? What temperature did I add the fragrance at? I think it was this. I'm not sure. And you might even not even remember which fragrance oil you used. Because, for instance, I have a cranberry cobbler and a cranberry apple, and they smell very, very similar. If you go out on the web or you go to a lot of established candle makers' sites, a lot of them have tools. And some of those tools happen to be test sheets. I don't remember which one I got mine from. I don't really follow it. As you'll see, I have notes all over the place. If you picked up this sheet, you probably would be like, what did she even do? So what I have done is I have a file folder for each of my different vessels, and I have it labeled. On the inside, I actually have a piece of paper that I have started. Just a simple plain white piece of paper, and you can use whatever works for you. But I write down across the top the name of the vessel. And then I just start taking notes off of my note pages. Usually it's about the wicks. So the first one is about this clear jar I got from the Dollar Tree. And one thing I want to mention, I'm going to digress a minute. One thing I want to mention is make sure you're labeling the front of your containers as well, because you may think, again, that you're going to remember what wick you used. If I have 4 of these, I might remember, oh, the cranberries, I used CD, and I know for the lemon, I used Premier Wicks. You're going to think you're going to remember it. You're not. Write it down. So back to my summary page. So on my summary page, and I apologize that I'm going to look down, but I want to read this to you. I have on here 2x CDN3s, and that I used the Freedom Wax and it tunneled. Eco 14, I used the Freedom Wax, it tunneled. CD10, tunneled but had a good hot throw. So then I go farther down the page and I wrote American Freedom Wax plus the beeswax. CDN 12, CDN 14 tunneled. Premier 775. And then I also noted that the jar was under the half full because I had rewicked it several times. And I wrote that it burned 3 times and had a good hot throw, but on the 3rd burn, it tunneled. Premier 780, burned 3 times, tunneled, great hot throw. CD16, low hot throw, slight tunnel. CD18, too hot, no hot throw. Premier 785, it's still in progress being tested. So you can see I have run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tests so far on just this one. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is the square jars from the Dollar Tree. I got to tell you, I love these jars, but they're my nemesis with wicking them. So if you don't know the jar I'm talking about, it's this guy. It's a beautiful jar. It's heavy. It looks beautiful when you get it filled and you start to burn it, but I have had a heck of a time with that guy. And I've done the same thing. So on my page, now I keep talking about rewicking. And if you haven't watched my video on that, go back and watch it, because I actually will show you how to take out the wicks using an apple core, how to rewick them, and then rewick them as what they call wickless, meaning I'm not gluing the tab to the bottom. I'm actually able to just pull out a wick and then drop a new one in. So go watch that video, because we're not going to talk about that right now. There's a lot more that goes into that. On my sheets, you'll see here where I write rewick, rewick, rewick. So on this one, I started out with 2x CDN10s. I had 10% fragrance oil. I noted the temp I heated it to, the temp I poured it at, how long I stirred it. I wrote down how many ounces we poured, the diameter of the vessel. I wrote down the date that we poured it, and then I noted the cure time. So the first time I burned that was a month after we made it. I actually let it cure for a long time because I was getting frustrated with this. And I noted that I burned it in the living room. I burned it for 3 hours and 45 minutes, and it super tunneled and drowned. So I wrote rewick. I rewicked it to 2x Premier 775s. Burn it in the dining room. Burn it only for 2¼ hours because it started tunneling immediately. And the longer you do this, you can tell sometimes that it's not the kind of tunnel that it might catch itself up on as it burns lower. You just know it's going to tunnel indefinitely. So I noted rewick, rewicked it up, 2x P785s. Okay, burn, tunneled, almost drowned. Rewicked it again, 2x CD12s. And so on and so on. The very last burn for 2½ hours, that was it. The jar was too hot. It was actually so hot that I couldn't touch the jar and I couldn't pick it up. So this is what I'm talking about burning that candle all the way down. I found a wick that I thought was working great. I was like cheering. My husband was cheering. The entire living space in the front of the house was all scented wonderfully. I was so proud of it. I was so happy. And I was like, yes, I finally found it. And then that last burn, that very last burn, and it wasn't all the way to the bottom yet. I could have probably burned it once or twice more. It was too hot. Too hot. It's a no-go. But this is what I'm talking about. You have to take excellent notes for yourself, because otherwise you're going to do what I did when I started out making candles. I thought, and one of my other videos talks about this, about wicks, I thought, I've done everything. I'm doing great. I have tested this candle so many different ways and I can't figure it out. When I actually sat down and I wrote out that sheet that I'm talking about that I read you, where I list all of the different wicks that I tried, when I did that, the one candle I thought that I had tested 15 different wicks, I tested 3. 3! I don't know where in my brain I thought I had 15, but without taking the notes and going back and reviewing them and then making notes from my notes and comparing them, I had no idea. Start getting a feel for how these wicks work with your vessels and your wax and your environment so that you can create the best candles possible. The worst thing you want to do is sell a candle, and I talk about this in one of my videos where I sold a candle and I had tested it and I thought it worked wonderfully, and it didn't. This is when I first got started and I did my first craft show, and I guess I wasn't quite ready as I thought I would be. And let's face it, if you sell a candle to a client and that happens, they're probably not going to buy from you again. So the other recommendation I have for you before we go here is make sure that you are creating candle care cards. Your customers aren't always going to follow them, but if you don't test your candles, don't sell them. You could be putting yourself up for liability, and I'm not an attorney. I don't know all the rules, but make sure you're putting those stickers on the bottom that are the warnings, and you need to protect yourself, because if you sell a candle and I sell that jar and it gets too hot, like the one I talked about, and that customer goes to pick it up, and what happens when you pick up something hot? Ah! Right? So now they drop it, and the hot wax spills on their child, or it spills on them and it burns them, or it ruins something, or they dropped it and the glass shatters and then the glass cuts them. We know we live in a sue-happy society. Many people are not going to say, oh my gosh, that was my fault. Why did I do that? It's a lot of people that are going to say, that candle was too hot. You should sue. Test your candles, keep your notes, keep records, because if you ever need to pull them out, I hope you don't, knock on wood, but if you ever need to prove that you've tested your candles, you got to have good notes. Wicks and testing, wicks and testing. That's where I have been for the last month, on top of everything else in my life. Wicks and testing, because I really want to launch. I really want to do a solid launch. I've done some soft launches. I've sold to some neighbors and friends and family. I have a couple things up on Etsy, the ones that I know work 100%, and my melts. But I really want to get out there this year and start doing some shows. And until I have my line 100% ready, and I mean 100% that I'm happy with, that I know that when I light that candle, I don't have to worry that it's going to tunnel or be too hot. So take the time. Don't rush this business. If you're serious about doing a candle business and you're serious about starting a true company, maybe a brick and mortar at some point, or selling and getting your product out there wholesale, or just doing more than dabbling with friends and family in the occasional church bazaars, then you got to put the effort and the time into it. You have to develop your product and your craft. You have to develop you. So for this week, that's what I want you to work on. If this business is for you, and this is what you're looking at. For this week, what I want you to do is focus strictly on testing. Something you've given up on, I want you to work for this week, specific to your business. Maybe that's just creating your labels. Maybe it's rewicking. Whatever it is, I want you to focus on it and tell me how it turns out. So that's it. That's all I have for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing about wicks and some of these misconceptions on that you're ready to start your business when you might not be yet. Sorry. But if you liked what we talked about, click on the subscribe button. I will be making more videos more frequently again. Again, my apologies. And click on the little bell so you're notified when I put them out. So other than that, have yourself an amazing rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.